On the night I married into the Harrington dynasty, I thought I had stepped into a fairy tale. The chandeliers glowed, the wine flowed, and every smile promised belonging. But when the applause faded, my mother-in-law leaned close, her perfume suffocating, and whispered, "You don't belong here." I laughed it off until I saw her disappear into the family's tower, the one etched with every Harrington name. My own was there, faint, scratched like someone tried to erase me. That was the moment I realized this marriage wasn't love, it was a trap. The Harrington estate glistened that night like a palace cut from marble in memory. I remember stepping through the iron gates with Daniel's hand wrapped around mine, my chest swelling with the warmth of champagne and promise. Guests cheered, music swelled, and the chandeliers above the ballroom flickered like constellations. It felt like a fairy tale, the kind I had whispered to myself as a little girl staring at cracked ceilings and dreaming of silk. Everything was perfect, down to the taste of strawberries on my lips and the velvet hush of violins. For a moment, I believed I belonged. Then Margaret leaned in. Her perfume, sharp and suffocating, filled my lungs as her voice slipped into my ear. "You don't belong here." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the music as if the orchestra had stopped just for her. I froze, unsure if I had misheard. Her smile stayed fixed, dazzling the crowd, but her eyes locked on mine with a precision that made me feel naked. I laughed awkwardly, pretending it was nothing, yet the words settled into me like ice, and the night's warmth began to crack. Later, after the toasts and dances, Daniel introduced me to the tower. The family called it the Legacy Tower. Tall, silent, and crowned with stone gargoyles, it stood behind the estate like a sentinel. Inside, bronze plaques lined the walls, each engraved with the names of Harrington ancestors. It was meant to symbolize immortality, proof that being a Harrington was more than life, more than death. Daniel smiled with pride as he gestured at the plaques, but something strange caught my eye. My own name had been freshly etched into the metal, not bold, not celebrated, but faint. So faint that the letters looked scraped, as if someone had tried to erase me before I'd even arrived. The sight should have filled me with pride, yet instead it burned with unease. Margaret stepped closer, her heels echoing on the stone floor. "Every name here," she said, "earns its place." Her hand brushed the plaque where my name sat like a ghost. "Some names fade, others remain." She didn't need to look at me directly. I felt the weight of her meaning in every syllable. When she turned and slipped deeper into the tower, the heavy door groaned shut behind her. The sound echoed like final judgment, leaving me outside in the cold. For the first time since marrying Daniel, I felt not chosen, but trapped. Days passed, and little fractures spread across my perfect life. At first, they were small, almost invisible. My credit card, once limitless, suddenly declined at a boutique. Daniel brushed it off, promising to handle it. At a family brunch, I noticed no one used my name. They called me his wife, the newcomer, never Emma. And though Daniel smiled in public, in private he grew distant, slipping out late at night, returning with excuses too thin to hold. The whispers in society's circles began to reach me. Temporary, they called me, a placeholder. I overheard women laugh softly at luncheons, their voices honeyed with pity. "She's pretty enough for now," one said, "but Margaret will never let her stand." I sipped my tea and forced a smile, though inside my chest tightened like a fist. One evening, restless and unable to sleep, I wandered Daniel's study. On his desk, a laptop glowed faintly. The Harrington family tree filled the screen, digitized, pristine, spanning centuries. I scrolled, searching for my place, desperate for proof I truly belonged. There it was, Emma Harrington. But next to my name was a label, neat and cruel, trustee, temporary. My blood ran cold, temporary. Not wife, not mother, not family, just a legal instrument, a placeholder, a pawn. The truth uncoiled inside me like a serpent. Margaret's whisper wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I didn't belong. I had never belonged. And as I stared at the glowing words on the screen, I knew one thing for certain. The game I thought I was playing had never been mine to begin with. For weeks after discovering the cruel label next to my name, I chose silence. I let Margaret think her words had broken me, and I let Daniel believe I was too timid to question him. I played the fragile bride, sipping my tea with lowered eyes, nodding at every command, moving through the estate as if it owned me instead of the other way around. They mistook my quiet for surrender. What they didn't know was that silence can be sharper than steel. Behind that silence, I began to move carefully. At night, when the house fell into its echoing slumber, I placed tiny cameras behind ornate vases, tucked voice recorders into the velvet folds of curtains. In Daniel's study, I slipped a flash drive into his laptop, copying every file I could reach. I kept my hands steady, even as my heart thundered in my ears. If they thought me powerless, then their arrogance would be my shield. The first discovery came like a spark in the dark. On a late night combing through digital ledgers, I stumbled upon a wallet address tagged with my name. At first I thought it was a mistake, but when I opened the account, the numbers almost blinded me. Tens of millions of dollars, all under Emma Harrington. Yet the control wasn't mine. The transactions flowed in and out from a distant server, masked and encrypted, as if I were nothing more than a mask for someone else's fortune. I stared at the screen until my hands shook. My name, my life, but none of it truly mine. When I traced the last transaction, the log delivered a chilling message. Property of Harrington Legacy Fund, do not touch. It felt less like a note and more like a warning. I shut the laptop, my breath ragged, the echo of those words pounding in my skull. Still, knowledge has a way of seeding courage. I wasn't as powerless as they believed. I had access, evidence, and, if I could find the right person, an ally. That ally came in the form of a shadow. A message arrived through an encrypted email I had never seen before. It was a single line. I know what they're hiding. Meet me if you want the truth. At first, I suspected a trap, but curiosity mixed with desperation drove me forward. The meeting took place in a dim cafe outside the city, where no Harrington would ever set foot. The man wore a hood and spoke with a voice distorted by software. He never gave me his name, only his reputation, a hacker who had spent years battling the Harringtons' empire from the digital shadows. You've been made into their shield, he told me, but shields can turn into swords if you know where to strike. With his guidance, I learned that the fortune tied to my name wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Margaret herself had orchestrated the accounts, laundering money through me. To the world, I was a benefactor, a silent trustee. In truth, I was a scapegoat waiting to burn. If the authorities ever uncovered the fund, the evidence would point directly at me. I clenched my fists as the truth spread through me like wildfire. Betrayal had never been so calculated, yet the hacker's eyes, or at least the suggestion of them under his hood, studied me with a kind of respect. You can run, he said, or you can fight. But if you fight, the collateral will be heavy. Thousands of employees, innocent families, livelihoods, gone. His warning pressed against my conscience like a blade. My anger screamed to expose Margaret and Daniel, to burn their empire to ash. But my logic whispered of ruin, of chaos I could never undo. Could I live with destroying strangers just to avenge myself? The dilemma tore at me for days. I walked the estate's halls, smiling at servants who had served the Harringtons for decades, watching them polish chandeliers and tend to gardens that had never been mine. If I unleashed the truth, they would pay the price too. My vengeance could become their noose. One evening, my encrypted phone buzzed. The hacker had sent me a video. My stomach clenched as I pressed play. The footage was grainy, captured from a hidden lens inside the Legacy Tower. Margaret appeared, her movements deliberate. She walked to a vault embedded in the stone wall and entered a code with steady hands. The door opened with a hiss. Inside, rows of files gleamed under dim light. She reached for one in particular, a USB. Across its surface, engraved in sharp letters, was my name, Emma's Files. The sight hollowed me. My identity wasn't only being erased, it was being rewritten. Margaret had built a narrative where I was the linchpin of something I didn't understand. She wasn't erasing me. She was crafting a story where I was the villain, the criminal, the perfect scapegoat. I shut the laptop, my hands trembling. The tower was no longer a monument. It was a prison, and my name was carved into its very walls. And for the first time, hope flickered. Because if I was their weapon, I could turn the blade. I thought evidence would be my salvation. The files, the recordings, the video of Margaret retrieving that USB, I believed the truth alone could shatter their fortress. I underestimated the Harringtons. The moment I released fragments of data through the journalist who had promised discretion, the family's machine moved faster than lightning. Headlines bloomed overnight, not with my discoveries, but with my destruction. Gold digger bride exposed. Emma Harrington, the woman who married for money. News anchors laughed into cameras, spinning me as a schemer desperate to claw her way into fortune. Every photo of me was weaponized. The diamond on my finger, the gown at my wedding, even a picture of me stepping out of a luxury car I hadn't chosen. My evidence had been buried beneath a flood of character assassination. Daniel sealed the coffin. Standing before flashing cameras, his voice strained with rehearsed sorrow, he declared, "Emma deceived me. She deceived all of us. She used my family for personal gain." His words cut sharper than Margaret's whisper ever had. Betrayal from a husband is a different kind of wound. It doesn't slice, it hollows. The revelations kept unraveling. I learned that our wedding, my dream turned nightmare, had been more contract than celebration. Documents emerged showing sponsors, investors, even clauses tying the ceremony to the public launch of a new Harrington Trust Fund. My marriage hadn't sanctified love, it had legalized money. I had been paraded as a prop, a smiling mannequin to bless a financial empire. The world devoured the story. My phone drowned in venom. Friends avoided me. Even strangers spit words like daggers when I walked down the street. The illusion of belonging had not just cracked, it had imploded. Then came the final blow. A court order arrived, sealed with the weight of Harrington power. It accused me of psychological instability, of posing a threat to my own child. They said my obsession with conspiracy and money had made me unfit. And with a stroke of a judge's pen, custody of my son was stripped away. The silence after that moment was the loudest sound I had ever known. His room remained untouched, tiny shoes by the bed, a stuffed rabbit by the pillow. But the air was gone, as if life itself had been removed with him. I had fought to prove I wasn't what they claimed, but now I had nothing left to fight with. Family gone, reputation shredded, my son taken. Yet despair has a strange way of peeling back illusions. One night, in the ruins of my credibility, I revisited the digital archives, scrolling through the quagmire of transactions and documents the hacker had helped me uncover. Most of it blurred together in senseless codes, but then, there it was, a signature line at the bottom of a contract linked to the Harrington Legacy Fund. Not ink on paper, but digital encryption. It was my name, my digital key. My legal identity embedded across billions of dollars in assets. My hand had never signed it, yet the system treated me as the linchpin. Every transfer, every laundering scheme, every offshore account, they all carried my encrypted authorization. At first, I shook with horror. They had built their empire on my shadow. If the system collapsed, the world would blame me. But then another thought struck. If every wire, every ledger, every lock was coded with my key, then I wasn't just the scapegoat. I was the gatekeeper. The realization settled into me like fire spreading through frozen veins. The Harrington Empire existed because of me, and if I chose, it could fall because of me. My despair began to twist, hardening into something sharper. For the first time, I no longer felt like prey. I was the weapon. For days, I wandered through the wreckage of my life, motherless to my son, nameless in society, and accused of madness. Yet within that silence, a new clarity rose. If they had built their empire on my shadow, then I could burn their empire with my light. I contacted the hacker again, this time with no hesitation. "I'm done playing defense," I told him. "I want to strike." Together we drew maps of the Harrington network, shell companies, offshore accounts, hidden trusts, all rooted in my forged signature. We knew we couldn't release everything at once. Too sudden, and the family would bury it again. But piece by piece, drip by drip, we could bleed them dry in full public view. The first leak was small, a single document linking the Harrington Legacy Fund to fraudulent property deals. The story ran in a minor online paper, barely a ripple. But then another leak followed, this time connecting the fund to illegal political donations. Each piece was undeniable, documented, traced. The journalist I had trusted before, burned once, but still determined, joined us, threading the narrative with precision. Within weeks, the Harrington Empire shook. Stock prices tumbled, investors withdrew, whispers of investigation filled the air. For the first time since Margaret whispered her curse into my ear, I felt power tilt in my favor. People online began to ask questions, some even defending me. Maybe she was framed. What if Emma is the real victim? The world watched, half cheering, half fearing. Some wanted the Harringtons destroyed. Others pitied me, seeing me as collateral in a war too large. That dual gaze, their complicity and their doubt, became fuel. The more they watched, the harder I pushed. Then Margaret struck back. At a press conference, she stood regal in her pearls, her voice calm as velvet. "Emma is not an outsider," she declared. "She is blood, a Harrington by right." The world froze. Cameras clicked. Reporters gasped. Even Daniel's mask slipped for a second. Margaret's eyes, cold and gleaming, found mine through the screen. Her father was one of us. She belongs. But she was never meant to rule. The words sent tremors through me. My entire life had been a fabrication of erasure. I wasn't merely married into this dynasty. I had been born of it, buried under its secrets. And if Margaret was willing to reveal this, it meant her throne was crumbling. I seized the revelation like a weapon. In court, I demanded recognition not as an intruder, but as a rightful heir. The hacker's data, the journalist's testimony, Margaret's own confession, all braided into a net too tight for even the Harrington machine to escape. The courtroom became my battlefield. I stood before portraits of ancestors whose names filled the legacy tower, and I laid claim to what had been hidden. "You erased me," I told them, my voice steady, "but you cannot erase the blood you tried to bury." The verdict was thunder. The court recognized me as a legal heir, a beneficiary of the Harrington legacy, not a placeholder. Ownership shifted, properties, accounts, the very tower itself, all carried my name as rightful custodian. When I walked into the legacy tower again, its cold stone no longer mocked me. The plaques gleamed, and mine shone unscarred. The truth was no longer hidden. It was carved into history. I had become what Margaret swore I could never be, untouchable. Yet as the applause of my small victory echoed in the media, I felt something colder stirring. Servants bowed lower. Associates addressed me with forced reverence. Even Daniel tried crawling back, eyes wet with false regret. And in the mirror, I saw a reflection I barely recognized, sharp, calculating, untouchable. Margaret had created me, and now I wore her mask. The victory tasted hollow. I had fought to break free of her chains, only to inherit them. And then, in the silence of my office, Richard appeared. The lawyer who had guided me, advised me, protected me in court. He set down a folder and smiled. Not kindly, never kindly, but with the satisfaction of a predator revealing its teeth. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You've played your part perfectly." Inside the folder lay contracts, coded files, all pointing not to Margaret, not to Daniel, but to him. The puppet strings that had tangled me from the start weren't woven by my husband or his mother. They had been pulled by Richard all along. Power arrived not with applause but with silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm, heavy and deceptive. I stood at the head of the Harrington Empire, my name legally restored, my place undeniable. Reporters called me victorious, but the headlines quickly soured. "Black Widow of Finance," they sneered, weaving me into the villain they needed. They painted me as a woman who had destroyed a dynasty, who had clawed her way to the top by blood and betrayal. The truth, that I had only fought to survive, meant nothing against the spectacle. Then came the tragedy I couldn't twist into strategy. A young analyst employed by the Harrington Fund jumped from a building, leaving a note that whispered of shame and uncertainty. The press latched onto it instantly. "Emma Harrington's war claims its first victim." Crowds gathered outside the estate, their chants turning venomous. To them, I wasn't a liberator. I was the architect of despair. Every face I passed seemed to judge me. Servants, once respectful, now avoided my eyes. The hacker, who had once been my ally, grew distant, his messages short, almost cold. Even the journalist who had helped me publish the leaks hesitated before taking my calls. Isolation pressed in on me from every side. Daniel appeared at the estate gates one evening, his suit crumpled, his voice dripping with rehearsed contrition. "I made mistakes," he said, "but we can fix this together. We can rebuild." His hand reached for mine, but I saw the hunger in his eyes, not for me, but for the wealth I now commanded. He wanted a seat at the table he'd once thrown me from. I closed the door on his pleading, though the echo of it clung to me long after. Then Richard made his move. He summoned me to the tower, the same legacy tower that had once mocked me and then crowned me. Papers spread across the oak table, each line of text bleeding with legal gravity. "This is for the stability of the family," he said, his tone calm, assured. "Sign, and you'll secure your reign forever." But the words hit a noose. The contract would cede operational control of the tower, and with it, the entire empire, to Richard. My name would remain, but only as a symbol. He would become the true master behind the mask. I stared at him, bile rising in my throat. After everything, after clawing my way from pawn to queen, he demanded I place myself back on the board as his piece. The realization struck me harder than Margaret's whisper or Daniel's betrayal ever had. Richard had been weaving this net from the beginning, watching me climb, ensuring I climbed high enough for him to strike. I didn't sign, not yet. But his smile told me my refusal was nothing more than a delay in his design. Days later, he revealed the depth of his hold. Over brandy and shadows, he spoke truths that sickened me. "The Harrington family was never the game," he said. "They are pawns, like so many others. The real power rests with the council." He explained it with chilling patience. A global network of old money and silent rulers, faceless men and women who pulled strings across industries and governments. Families like the Harringtons were shells, puppets designed to distract, while true influence flowed unseen. I was no heir, no victor. I was another mask being fitted for their theater. He left me with a choice. Join them, become part of their machinery, betray the ideals I had clung to, or resist and be annihilated. The council didn't tolerate loose ends. That night, I returned to my study, searching for strength in the files I had hoarded, the evidence I had gathered. I reached for the USB, the one piece of truth that had always anchored me, the key to unraveling their empire. My hand shook as I slid it into the port. The screen blinked. The files opened, but what spilled across the screen was wrong, corrupted, rewritten, twisted into propaganda against me. And then I saw it. An embedded note left in the code. You trusted me. That was your first mistake. It wasn't Richard. It wasn't Margaret. It wasn't Daniel. It was the hacker, the ally I had clung to, the ghost in the system who had whispered promises of justice. He had stolen the real USB, leaving me with an illusion. The final betrayal burned deeper than all the rest. Every ally, every bond I had leaned on had fractured into treachery. And now the last key I held had slipped through my fingers. I had thought I was free. In truth, I had only climbed higher into the trap. The night I realized the hacker had betrayed me was the night I stopped believing in games altogether. Every rule I had followed, every move I had calculated, had been designed by someone else. Margaret's sneer, Daniel's betrayal, Richard's trap, even the hacker's whispered promises. All of it had been a stage where I was both actor and scapegoat. I sat in the silent study, the corrupted files glowing on the screen, lines of code crawling like maggots across the page. For the first time, I understood. There was no winning as long as I played by their rules. The council owned the board. The Harringtons were just ornamental pieces, and I, blood heir or not, was the most valuable pawn of all. So I did the one thing they could never predict. I chose to stop playing. For days, I prepared in silence. I liquidated what little I still controlled, not to hoard, but to scatter. I opened anonymous channels, rerouted funds, built encrypted drives, and began uploading everything, every contract, every transaction, every audio clip, every video file. If the council thrived in shadows, then I would burn them with light. The leaks began like sparks, but soon turned into a wildfire. Documents appeared simultaneously across continents, in languages from Mandarin to Spanish to Russian. Journalists who had once doubted me now had proof too heavy to ignore. Government stumbled under the weight of revelations. Ministers tied to offshore accounts, judges bribed, corporations bought and sold like cattle. The world trembled. And the Harrington name? It plummeted from a pedestal to a pit. Stocks collapsed, properties were seized, the once proud tower swarmed with investigators. Margaret's face, once framed in pearls and power, appeared on every broadcast, her voice breaking as she denied what could no longer be denied. Daniel vanished, his charm no longer currency. Richard's mask cracked under scrutiny, his ties to the council exposed. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. My son was gone from my arms, spirited away to shield him from scandal. Strangers argued online whether I was a hero or a monster. I had destroyed the empire, yes, but in doing so, I had destroyed myself. The final move came quietly. One morning, the estate staff found my study door open, the laptop still humming, the chair empty. My clothes remained in the closet, my jewelry locked in velvet drawers. Only a note scrawled in my own hand lay on the desk. The only way to win is to refuse the game. After that, I ceased to exist. No one saw me leave. No cameras caught my escape. Some whispered I had been silenced by the council. Others claimed I fled across oceans with a new identity. For the world, I became a ghost. A year later, a new name began to circulate in the underground networks, Phoenix Protocol. It wasn't a company nor a family, but a movement. Women trapped in gilded cages, forced into marriages that turned them into assets, suddenly had a lifeline. Secret accounts were exposed, hidden contracts dissolved, and oppressive dynasties began to crumble one by one. The symbol of the movement spread like wildfire, a tower split in half, flames rising from its heart, casting light instead of shadow. People whispered that only someone who had lived inside such a tower could have birthed it. They whispered my name like a rumor, like a legend, Emma. I watched from afar, not as an heir, not as a widow, not as a victim. I was something else now, untethered, unclaimed. My wealth was gone, but in its place I had built something they could never erase, a weapon of truth, a legacy of fire. And yet at night when silence returns, I ask myself the question I cannot answer. I burned their tower, but in raising a new one made of secrets and fire and whispered names, have I truly escaped them? Or have I simply built another prison, this time of my own design? The world may never know. Perhaps I don't either. All I know is that once, a woman told me I didn't belong. And she was wrong. I don't just belong. I redefine what it means to belong, even if it costs me everything.